Welcome to the debate. We're here to explore some core tensions and complexities around critical issues, hopefully illuminating different perspectives to deepen understanding. Today, we're tackling a really big one, the urgent global challenge of ecosystem degradation and, well, the proposals out there for trying to restore planetary health. The central question we're going to wrestle with is this. Are advanced engineering and technological interventions the, let's say, primary and most reliable path forward for ecosystem resilience? Or do the inherent complexities and, frankly, the risks involved demand a more cautious approach, one that prioritizes understanding first, really focusing on preventing unintended harm? My position is that the accelerating decline we're seeing in our ecosystems makes it necessary to embrace these advanced engineering tools. I think they represent our most promising path to actually reverse the trend.
And I'll be taking the underside, highlighting the profound complexities of natural systems and, the historical pitfalls we've seen with human intervention. I'll be advocating for a more deliberate, perhaps understanding first approach.
Okay, let's dive in. Look, the sheer scale of ecosystem degradation we're witnessing globally, it's elevated the engineering of ecosystem resilience to arguably humanity's most vital, unsolved technical challenge. Our traditional efforts, things aimed at safeguarding essential services, food security, climate regulation, even finding new medicines, they're simply proving insufficient. They're not keeping pace. So I contend that the path forward, it isn't just an option, it's really a necessity. We absolutely need to combine high-resolution measurement with truly targeted resilience-boosting interventions. That's how we halt and ultimately reverse these declines. And think about the converging advances we're seeing right now. High-throughput genomics, which lets us rapidly sequence and understand huge amounts of genetic data. Precise gene editing tools, techniques for accelerated evolution, advanced robotics, novel sensors gathering just unprecedented amounts of data, and sophisticated AI analytics. Together, these aren't just small improvements. They unlock an entirely new kind of integrative paradigm for engineering this resilience. These are the fit-for-purpose technologies we desperately need for effective stewardship. They allow us to design interventions that are both hopefully ethical and environmentally responsible, moving us beyond just reacting to problems towards being proactive.
Right. And while I certainly recognize the critical urgency you've highlighted, it's undeniable. My perspective really emphasizes the profound, almost staggering, inherent complexity of ecosystems. Our source material itself describes these systems as, and I'm quoting here, complex adaptive networks where small changes can have outsized effects. It even notes that their combined complexity surpasses that of most engineered systems. And history, unfortunately, is just littered with cautionary tales, examples of well-intentioned interventions that went terribly, terribly wrong. You mentioned some. Think of the cane toads in Australia, or the Nile perch disaster in Lake Victoria, or even the widespread misuse of pesticides. These are all examples of what the document calls broad impact decisions with insufficient risk assessment. And they led to unforeseen, cascading ecological collapses.
So, these historical lessons, they teach us a really critical truth. While these new tools might indeed be powerful, any intervention in these incredibly intricate systems must have surgical precision. That's a quote too. And that demand for precision is exceptionally difficult, maybe even impossible to consistently meet in dynamic, ever-changing natural environments. So deploying such powerful new technologies, it rigorously, and I stress rigorously, demands ethical considerations, inclusive governance, authentic community engagement, and long-term monitoring. These can't be afterthoughts. They have to be foundational if we genuinely want to prevent unintended harm.
Okay, I understand why you emphasize caution and the lessons from history. I really do. But the pace of ecosystem degradation isn't slowing down. It's accelerating. We simply do not have the luxury of waiting years or decades to achieve perfect understanding before we act. In fact, our current tools to measure, predict, and manage these ecosystems are, fundamentally insufficient for the scale of the problem. And this is precisely where these converging technological advances come in. They are designed specifically to address these very limitations. They offer us unprecedented insight and the capacity to act with a level of specificity that was, frankly, unimaginable before. We can, as the material suggests, use an integrated ecology, evolution, engineering modeling framework. That's a mouthful, but it's key. It can transform how we make decisions about if we should intervene, when to intervene, and how to do it responsibly and effectively. This lets us proactively deploy these technologies, not just to react to decline, but to actually, bend this curve of degradation and truly start restoring ecosystems. It's about learning through smart, targeted action, not just waiting passively for complete knowledge that might never fully arrive.
That's an interesting way to frame it, suggesting the tech accelerates learning. However, I'd argue that the document itself, the source we're discussing, really highlights how much fundamental understanding we still lack. It details numerous knowledge gaps. It explicitly asks questions like, which experiments are needed? It poses really fundamental questions such as, which species dependencies are strongest? Or which diversity levels are needed for ecological resilience and function? Now, acting with the surgical precision you mentioned in these complex adaptive networks, well, that requires precisely this deep foundational understanding that the document itself admits we still often lack. Past mistakes weren't usually born from a lack of good intentions, were they? They came from a profound lack of comprehensive foresight into the intricate web of ecological interactions. Simply moving faster with more powerful tools without addressing these core knowledge gaps first risks repeating those same kinds of mistakes, potentially on an even grander scale.
Right. We absolutely must learn from the past by investing seriously in the rigorous study skills the document mentions, everything from controlled lab environments to large-scale ecotrons, those sophisticated, controlled facilities that let us simulate and test complex ecosystem responses. That's how we truly reveal the key parameters and help species adapt responsibly, not just quickly. I appreciate your focus on deep understanding, and I absolutely agree knowledge is power. But I'm not convinced that line of reasoning fully captures the, let's say, qualitative shift these new technologies represent. It kind of implies these are just more powerful versions of the same old blunt instruments we used in the past. On the contrary, the precision sensing, the AI analytics, the targeted gene editing discussed in our material, these are specifically designed to move beyond those broad impact interventions of the past. The document isn't advocating for, widespread ecosystem alterations. It specifically talks about targeted support of keystone species, community assemblages, or habitat connectivity. These are seen as offering high leverage opportunities to strengthen resilience. So this isn't about general modifications. It's about incredibly fine-grained interventions guided by sophisticated data. This allows us to clarify potential impacts beforehand with precision sensing and sharper risk forecasts. The goal here is to build resilience in a highly specific, controlled manner, using data to constantly monitor and adapt our approach, rather than just, releasing something into the wild and hoping for the best, like maybe we did before.
Okay, that's a compelling argument for the initial precision of these tools. And yes, I acknowledge the significant advances in targeting interventions. However, I still find myself questioning the feasibility of truly avoiding broad, unpredictable impact in systems that are inherently complex adaptive networks. Even if you start with surgical precision, right at the point of intervention, the source material itself explicitly warns us that small changes can have outsized effects. The danger isn't necessarily a broad initial action itself, but rather the broad, unpredictable impact that a seemingly precise intervention can trigger down the line, within this intricate, interconnected web of species interactions. To genuinely avoid repeating past mistakes, we need to recognize that even our most advanced models, our best simulations, are, by definition, approximations of reality. The document itself asks a critical question.
Where are precise models needed or approximations acceptable? This question, I think, points directly to the kind of humility we need when dealing with systems whose full complexity we might never completely master. Relying solely on the promise of sharper risk forecasts? Well, that might still leave us dangerously vulnerable to unforeseen consequences, particularly if we don't fully comprehend the nonlinear responses inherent in these adaptive networks. Things don't always react proportionally.
It's true. Modeling is complex. But what's really clear from our material is that we're facing this critical balancing act. How do we equitably harness the, frankly, transformative benefits of these technologies while simultaneously preventing unintended harm? It's not presented as an either-or, it's framed as an imperative. The document explicitly calls for integrating ethical considerations, inclusive governance, authentic community engagement, and long-term monitoring directly into the deployment strategy for these technologies. We know that nature is often underexplored and undervalued, but also overexploited. It represents this immense, largely untapped reservoir of biomolecules and bioprocesses. These new technologies, they offer a tangible path to unlock unprecedented human and planetary prosperity. It's arguably our responsibility to leverage them, but with the appropriate guardrails firmly in place, enabling, as the source says, communities and ecosystems to prosper together. This integration of ethics and governance isn't a limitation, I don't think. It's actually a core design principle for responsible innovation, allowing us to actively shape a more beneficial future.
I see it a bit differently, actually. The fact that the material uses the word demand for these ethical and governance frameworks, to me, that suggests they aren't merely adjuncts or optional guardrails. They sound more like fundamental prerequisites for any responsible action in this space. The document warns quite clearly that prioritizing short-term costs over environmental health often weakens ecosystems. And it goes on to say that those perceived savings can backfire, raising long-term costs and risks to companies and communities because environmental impacts are undervalued and difficult to gauge. So the very reason we need such robust ethical considerations and governance right from the outset is precisely because the sheer power and potential reach of these new tools make the risk for unintended harm far greater, exponentially greater, than anything we've dealt with before.
If we rush ahead to pursue these potentially transformative benefits without first solidly establishing these ethical and governance foundations, truly embedding them, we risk inadvertently creating new, perhaps more insidious forms of broad impact decisions with insufficient risk assessment. That could fundamentally undermine the very sustainability we claim we're trying to build.
Okay, I agree. The integration must be robust, absolutely. But I actually see the technologies themselves as enabling a more ethical and governed approach, rather than inherently posing a greater risk if managed correctly. Think about it. The same precision sensing and AI that allow for targeted interventions can also be used for unprecedented, continuous monitoring. This gives us real-time feedback on both environmental and social impacts. That capability allows for truly adaptive governance, where we can adjust interventions based on ongoing data streams. That's something much, much harder to do with older, less flexible methods. So these advancements aren't just about what we do to ecosystems, but fundamentally change how we interact with them, potentially with more information, more accountability built in, and a greater capacity for course correction. This can foster genuine, data-driven community engagement too. This kind of iterative, data-rich approach is fundamentally different from past interventions where monitoring was often, let's be honest, an afterthought, and the real impacts only became clear years or even decades later.
I acknowledge that potential for enhanced monitoring and adaptive management. That certainly represents an improvement over past practices. However, I still find myself asking if enabling inherently translates to ensuring ethical and responsible outcomes. It's a subtle but important distinction. While the tools can certainly provide more data, their very power also tends to concentrate decision-making authority, doesn't it? And it raises serious questions about access, about equity, and the potential for new forms of exploitation of natural resources, even if it's done with so-called precision. The historical tendency, which the source material explicitly notes, to undervalue environmental impacts, well, that feels like a systemic issue, not just a technological one that new tools automatically fix. Building true resilience and genuinely ensuring that communities and ecosystems prosper together, That requires, I believe, a fundamental shift in our values and our governance structures before we fully unleash technologies that could potentially amplify existing inequalities or inadvertently privatize the benefits while socializing the risks. The ethical framework isn't just about how we measure impacts, but it's crucially about who decides, who ultimately benefits, and who bears the burden of these powerful new interventions.
Okay, wrapping up my view. In sum, while vigilance, ethical foresight, and yes, careful consideration are absolutely paramount, the overwhelming scale and the relentless acceleration of ecosystem degradation demand that we proactively embrace the immense promise offered by advanced engineering and technological interventions. These tools are no longer the crude instruments of the past. They offer unprecedented precision, real-time insight, and the genuine capacity to actively manage and help restore ecosystem resilience. They really do pave the way for potential unparalleled human and planetary prosperity, offering solutions that, frankly, current traditional approaches alone are proving tragically insufficient to achieve. We must act with intelligence, and these technologies, used wisely, represent the highest form of that intelligence applied to our planet's greatest challenge.
And to conclude, from my perspective, while the allure and the potential of these advanced technologies are undeniably powerful, the hard-won wisdom gleaned from past ecological missteps, combined with the inherent, profound complexity of ecosystems, dictates a more tempered, a fundamentally cautious approach. Our priority must remain achieving a deeper, evidence-based understanding of these intricate systems first. We absolutely must embed robust ethical frameworks and inclusive governance structures as non-negotiable prerequisites, not just add-ons, but right at the very core of any intervention we consider. This is the only way to ensure that our efforts to enhance resilience genuinely avoid unintended harm and foster a truly sustainable future, rather than simply accelerating towards an unknown destination with potentially irreversible consequences.
So both perspectives, I think, really underscore the critical importance of actively engaging with the future of ecosystem resilience.
Absolutely.
The material we've discussed today certainly provides fertile ground for much further exploration, and it demonstrates the real value of considering multiple viewpoints as we navigate these complex and profoundly important challenges ahead.